Hey everybody, I'd like to take you shopping today at one of my favorite local garden centers with an old friend of mine. A few weeks ago, this garden center was packed with plants and people, and now as they're nearing the end of their season, it's cleared out a little bit and they have some time and space, so we can go in and show you some of our favorite shopping tips for plants. Hey everybody, I'm here today with Marcia Leeper, who is one of my garden mentors and someone who I worked with for so very long at Garden Gate magazine, where she was the test garden manager for many years. And now she has moved into a different phase of her career, and she's a garden educator and a garden coach, and she does a little work here at one of my favorite greenhouses locally called Piney Ridge Greenhouse in Johnston, Iowa. And this is the place I shop every year for my container plants and to see what new perennials are out there. It's just a great selection and super fun place to be. And I get to run into Marcia every year, so that's always really a great thing. And I was here a couple weeks ago, and she started loading my cart up with all kinds of things that I didn't know I needed, but I did. And so that was really fun. And Marcia is just the container queen. She's got all kinds of great garden advice. And I thought it would be interesting for her to tell us a little bit about how to shop for plants at the garden center. So, hey, I am so glad to be working with you again.
Thank you. I start working here when it's still snowing outside, so I have helped plant a lot of these plants as well as the people that I work with. So as we talk about these, I'm going to know personally a little bit about them.
Yeah, great. So, well, let's start with the plants. One question I hear people ask is, should I buy a plant in bloom or not in bloom? Because you're always sort of, you know, the blooms, of course, are what suck you in.
Right. Well, if they're blooming, you know what color it is, and it matches the tag. But here, we kind of pride ourselves on making sure that they're the right ones. But if we could take a look at one of these plants here, this is a Salvia, and it is not blooming fully right now, but there's a little bit of a bloom here that will give you an indication of the color, which is a dark blue.
So you know that's what you're getting at least.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So this, I'm going to slide in front of you here, and so yeah, so you can see this little bud here. What else makes you know that this is a really good plant?
Well, I'd want to take a look down here at the stem, and it's healthy all the way down. It's got lots of foliage, and when you open it up here, you're going to see the promise for a lot more blooms along the stem.
Yeah, you can see lots of, at all the leaf axils, you can see branching starting to happen. So this plant will just branch out and have all kinds of blooms later.
Yeah, and I advise people to buy the plants I buy.
Yeah,
so that
exactly.
is certainly one of those things.
So if you came across a flat of plants that had blooms, the plants were all blooming, would you pinch the blooms off when you took them home?
Oh, sure. Some plants don't tolerate that really well, but this one certainly will. And you just want to cut them or break them off at a next junction, so you're going to have a new bloom come up. But that gives an opportunity for the roots to go, okay, I'm going to dive into the soil and not worry so much about blooming right now.
Right, and also it forces the plant to branch more too, right?
Correct,
so then
and you'll have a bigger, whiter, more happy plant.
Potentially more blooms later on.
Nobody wants a stick for a plant.
No, right, so so that's a good thing to look for. Let's take a look at a few other things that we should be looking at for plants. So sometimes the same plants might be different sizes on the garden bench, on the bench at the nursery.
Right.
And what do you look for in terms of habit and size for plants?
Sure, and one thing that we haven't talked about yet is to look at the tag. That is going to give you a tremendous amount of information about how tall they are, what kind of conditions that they need. And for this one, it says it gets about 28 inches tall. And if you take a look at it, it's kind of a little bit overgrown. It doesn't mean that you can't pinch it off and change its shape a little bit, but you might look at a plant that has just a little bit tighter habit early. This one says it gets about 24 inches tall, so the height of both of those are going to be similar. So in the early part of the season, look for something a little more compact, a little less leggy, and maybe something you don't have to pinch back quite so much.
Right, so and coleus can take that. I mean, pinching a coleus will just make it branch, and that's totally fine, but if it's been growing for a really long time in a small confined space like this, that might lead to another thing that we want to talk about next, which is the roots.
Right.
And sometimes, actually,
they start coming out the bottom like this. And this pot is really full of roots, because look at the roots have to support a lot of plant. It doesn't mean you shouldn't buy this plant. It just means it's going to be a little extra care and a little extra thought. And to cut something back when it's brand new, it would be kind of nice to buy something that's a little more compact already.
Right. So
just ideally.
So compact plants, lots of branching.
And nothing happening on the bottom with the roots coming out.
That's a good idea. Okay. So here's an example of two plants that are the same plant but very different sizes. And with the coleus, we were just talking about a case where you might choose to buy the more compact one.
Right.
But in this case, you might go the other direction with
Right.
this evolvulus, right?
Yeah, evolvulus is a draping kind of plant. It will fall over the side of a container. It's a little bit slower to grow than a coleus, certainly. But in this case, we can see that this plant, as opposed to this plant, is just a little bit bigger. It doesn't mean either one of those aren't going to be successful. But when you're going to the nursery and they're available, I would choose a plant that's got a little bit more growth like this.
It'll just drape a little sooner.
It'll
for
drape
you.
sooner,
Yeah.
and it's just covered with little areas where it's going to bloom.
Right.
This evolvulus, of course, is absolutely beautiful, and people are going to buy it whether they look really healthy or not, because everybody wants them. But
Yeah.
if the choice was mine, I would choose this one as opposed to this plant.
And if it were, in this case, if it were even, this seems perfect to me.
Yes.
If it were starting to really drape a long ways, and sometimes the center starts to get kind
Right.
of sparse on, especially petunias and calibrachoas and evolvulus, maybe, those you would not want to go that direction.
And
right?
probably not, and they would need a haircut. You know,
Yeah.
they'd have to be cut back. But the growth for the nursery right now, this
Yep.
is nearly perfect to get a good start on an evolvulus,
Right.
and these are just going to be a little bit slower as they grow.
So are there things that you would make sure you avoided if you saw them on the leaves or the stems of a plant?
Oh, sure. If you take a look at these plants, especially the ones that are draping down, you might want to take a look underneath them to make sure they're good and healthy. And you can put your fingers down there, and if there's any mushy kind of thing, or if
Yeah.
it's wet, those stems may not be happy for very long.
Because maybe they've been overwatered at some point and started to rot. So you
Sure.
want to avoid anything that looks like it's rotting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think your hands can do a lot in the nursery to kind of feel around and to see how the plant is growing and how strong it is in the pot. So be sure and pick it up and make friends with it when you're buying it.
Right. So we just talked about the roots of that coleus that we looked at. Sometimes that happens, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah, especially in grasses. We're over here in the grass section. That there'll be a tremendous amount of root growth in the plant material. You want to make sure that it's not loose, obviously, or it's a brand new plant. But for example, this one is going to be very stiff when you put your thumbs down in it, and you know it's very full of roots, but it's really not coming out and curling around. It is a plant that probably needs to be put in the ground earlier. Rather than just holding it on your porch.
how do you know if it's too many? How do you know if it's too packed?
Well, some of these grasses you're going to see come out of the bottom like this.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, and I wouldn't necessarily not buy it, but that gives you an idea of how full of roots it is, and it may stall out when you first plant it, because you might have to actually either slice some of those roots or tickle them open to get them to grow more vigorously.
Otherwise,
And-
they just circle.
Exactly.
Continue.
And the other thing is that our season here, where we are right now, is very short. So we want to make sure that we have the best plant material we possibly can
To start with.
to start with.
Yeah. So if you found one, if there were two, and you had the option of one that was circling around on the bottom of the pot or
Right.
one that wasn't, you'd just choose the one that wasn't.
I would choose the one that wasn't.
Yeah, that makes
exactly.
sense.
But if that's all there was, you can cut that bottom off, pull it out, tickle out the roots, and plant it. And just know that it may stall it out for just a little while.
Just might start a little slower.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So there's a lot of plants that you can buy either as packs or that you can buy in 3, 4, 6-inch
Right.
pots. And how do you know which is the better way to go? Obviously, packs are less expensive.
Right. If you have a large area to plant, you know, like a landscape planting, then you probably want to go with the pack varieties because they're a little less expensive and they will go a little bit farther for you. These in the 4-inch, is what we're looking at right now, would be really good for containers. Not saying that you couldn't put them out in a landscape kind of situation, but they're going to be just a little bit more expensive compared to these packs.
Right. So I bed out impatiens in front of my house every year. This would cost a crazy. That would be crazy.
It would cost more money. Yes.
Yeah. And I can get a flat for $20 or something, and take care of that.
Right.
So this is true of some plants that are can be seed grown, right? So most packs are started from seeds.
Yes, or very tiny plugs because I've planted them before, but most often it's seeded. So you're not going to see these kind of wild and crazy type of hybrids that they have in many different plant material.
Because they tend to be more cuttings grown that are grown in the more designer type plants.
Yeah, so if you're looking for something exotic or a petunia that has multiple colors, you probably want to look at not at a pack, but rather at a larger container.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks. Now let's talk about some perennial plants. I'm assuming most of the same things apply.
Oh, sure.
Right? So clean, healthy foliage, compact plants, roots that are just right for the pot that they're in.
Staying in that pot.
Right. And so here's a couple of examples of some moonbeam Coreopsis.
Right.
And I'll grab one and you can grab one and we'll take a look here. So this is the same exact plant, and if you had to choose one,
I would choose this a little more compact one.
Right.
This one is a little bit leggy. Doesn't mean again that it wouldn't be a beautiful plant, but this one I think will get started for you a little more quickly. It has buds on it, and it won't be quite so high in the air. The other thing about this good little plant is I think it could be split into at least 2 other plants. You know, it's looking mighty healthy.
So the more crowns that you see, or the more stems you see coming out of the base of the plant and the soil.
Correct.
Either the bigger the plant you'll have right away, or
you can make 2
or more.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So you're just always looking for more crowns.
That's right. And once again, let me put my hands down in there and feel it and take a look. A lot of plants you can't split because you're going to have a main stem there.
Right.
But in this case, I see a nice opening for my knife to just cut it in half.
That makes sense. That's great. So I have a cart full of plants that I've loaded up from the garden center.
Yippee!
Right? And I'm taking them home. What should I do special for these plants to help them transition?
Oh, sure. You know, you're taking them away from kind of a wonderful environment where they're perfect, there's no wind, there's no rain, there's none of that sort of thing. When you take them home, you need to protect them from the wind and you need to water them. Right. Because they are in these little containers and they're prisoners. So you need to keep them watered, and sometimes you might want to look at the weather and see if it's going to be freezing. And if that's the case, then you want to keep them inside until they're ready to go out.
Okay.
That brings me to the point that sometimes you need to harden them off.
Okay.
And hardening off means that you put them outside for a while, bring them inside for a while. So put them out during the day, bring them in the evening.
For the cold temperatures.
For the cold temperatures.
Now, if the weather's gotten hot out and they're coming out of the greenhouse,
then you still need to do that, but put it in a protected place.
During the day,
yes.
In the shade.
Yes, and the wind is the enemy of these little plants because they'll desiccate or dry out that foliage.
So really keep them watered.
Right, and you've bought these little packages of hope. You want to make sure that they do very well for you.
Right, so keep them watered and put them in a little bit of shade just at the beginning to kind of help them transition.
Right.
And that especially applies for greenhouse purchase plants like this. If they've been growing outside at the garden center,
that's a little bit different.
Yeah,
right.
Great. This has been so fun to work together today.
It's good to see you again.
It is good to see you. Thanks for doing this with us today.
Yes, it was great fun.
It was fun. I can't wait to do something like this again.
Buy plants.
Carrie, thank you so much for letting us shoot here today at Piney Ridge Greenhouse. As I mentioned, this is one of my favorite local garden centers to visit every spring, and the selection you have is just amazing.
Thank you.
And so tell me a little bit about the year here at Piney Ridge.
Well, we start out in late February, and we have about 40 employees total, and we pretty much fill up you know, the greenhouses, and then when we get to a certain point, usually around April 1st, we open the doors. And then we are open until we sell everything out, so we're seasonal.
And so usually you're closed down by June 15th, I would say. Is that about right?
Yeah, for the last couple of years we've closed at the end of May.
It's been a busy couple of years. Yeah, right, for everybody in gardening. Well, again, this has been so fun to be here and to talk to you today and to talk to Marcia, and we really appreciate it and encourage everybody to support your local garden centers.
Yes, thank you.